The first thing Elias Mercer saw was the trembling edge of a torn buckskin blanket, lifted by the wind like a warning. The second was the girl beneath it, thin, wild-eyed, standing barefoot in the mud outside his ranch, as if the world behind her had burned to ash. Her breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. Her hands shook, not from weakness, but from the effort of staying upright. "I'll work," she said before he could speak, voice cracked from cold and hunger. "Just don't turn me away." Wind swept across Silver Basin, carrying the scent of thawing earth and distant pine fire. But it was the look in her eyes that stopped Elias where he stood, the look of someone who had run until there was nowhere left to run. A silence fell between them, a fragile, dangerous beginning. Before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Let me know where you're listening from, and thank you for riding along with us. Silver Basin awakens slowly in early spring, as if the land itself were unsure whether it was ready to return to life. Frost clung stubbornly to the shaded edges of the valley, but the mid-morning sun coaxed thin ribbons of mist from the ground, letting them drift lazily along the bends of Coldwater Creek. The water moved with a steady, deliberate voice, sliding over stone and broken branches, murmuring against the stillness of the open fields. The air smelled of wet earth, thawing pine needles, and the faint smoke of Elias Mercer's cookfire curling from the chimney of his weathered cabin. The ranch sat on the southern bank of the creek, its buildings arranged without elegance, but with a kind of earnest practicality. The cabin leaned into a slope of grass beaten flat by winter storms. Beyond it, a sagging stretch of fence traced the boundary of a small pasture where two cows flicked their tails at the lingering cold. To the west stood the barn, a rough timber structure patched in places with mismatched boards. Everything about this little homestead carried the look of a man who worked alone, who fixed what he could and endured what he couldn't. Elias himself was a figure carved by solitude. Broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly when damp, he carried the quiet caution of someone who had spent too many years with only the wind for company. His eyes, a deep, steady gray, missed very little. A pale scar crossed high along his left cheekbone, a thin reminder of a fight long ago, one he rarely spoke of and never thought worth explaining, though only in his early 30s. He had the air of a man who had known both loss and silence for far longer. He watched the girl now standing at the edge of his yard. Even from a distance, he could see fatigue carved into her features, the hollowness beneath her cheekbones, the rawness at the corners of her lips, the way her breath rattled lightly in her chest. Yet there was something unbroken in the set of her shoulders, something fierce beneath the exhaustion. Her hair, long and black as creekstone after rain, fell past her elbows in tangled waves. Her eyes dark, sharp, alert, scanned everything at once, tracking escape routes, shelter, danger. Apache eyes, he realized. Eyes that had seen the kind of trouble the valley liked to pretend no longer existed. Across the creek, barely visible through the thin morning fog, lay another homestead, a cabin built on higher ground with a small orchard behind it. Jedediah Boone lived there, a man in his 60s whose calm voice and deep-lined face spoke of a life spent learning what to fear and what to let go. He was the closest thing Elias had to family. Sometimes Elias saw the old man's lantern glow at night and felt a strange reassurance, as though knowing someone else breathed in the valley made it less empty. Jedediah's young nephew, Caleb, often ran between the two ranches once his chores were done, quick-footed and sharp-eyed. The boy had a way of appearing just when help was needed, offering tools or questions or an earnest grin. Silver Basin could feel like the loneliest place on earth, yet with Jedediah and Caleb nearby, it never became unbearable. But the girl standing in Elias's yard was something different, something the valley had not seen before. She held herself with the wary poise of a hunted animal. Her blanket did not hide the bruising around one wrist, nor the faint tremble in her legs. She looked like someone who had walked through cold nights without rest and survived only by stubbornness. Elias lowered the hammer in his hand. The creaking barn door behind him groaned as wind tugged at its hinges. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf cried out a low, rising howl that faded into the pines. The girl flinched at the sound, but her gaze stayed fixed on him, not pleading, not submissive, simply waiting for his judgment. Elias set the hammer down on the porch rail, the metal clinking softly in the cold morning air. The girl didn't move. Her blanket shifted slightly as the wind pressed against her, revealing a forearm marked with faint soot or ash. And beneath that, old scars that didn't belong on someone so young. Her feet were bare, reddened by frost and long travel. She should have been shaking from the cold. Yet the only tremor in her body came from exhaustion, fighting stubborn will. He took a single step closer. "I asked if you need help," he said quietly. "Do you understand me?" Her chin lifted the slightest bit, as though refusing to shrink before him. "I said I'll work," she repeated. Her English was halting but firm, each word shaped with effort. "You have food, warmth, roof." She swallowed hard, eyes narrowing as though ready for him to deny her. "Let me stay. A little time. I can earn it." Elias studied her carefully. Years of solitude had sharpened his instincts. He knew the look of someone running from trouble, and the look of someone who was trouble. She was neither. She was something else entirely worn thin. Yes, frightened, absolutely. But her fear was not of him. Her fear was of what waited behind her, somewhere beyond the tree line and the miles she had crossed alone. He lifted his hands slightly, palms open. "No one's turning you away," he said. "But you're in bad shape. You need rest." At that, the girl finally reacted not with relief, but with suspicion. She stepped back, weight shifting onto the balls of her feet the way a doe braces when cornered. Elias froze, not wanting to startle her further. "You don't have to come inside," he added. "The barn's warmer than it looks. You can sleep there if you want." Her gaze flicked past him to the barn, its crooked frame, the cracks where light leaked through. Safe enough for a night, not safe enough for complete trust. She said nothing. Behind Elias, a familiar voice called from across the creek. "Elias, you need a hand with that north rail or not?" Jedediah Boone's voice rolled easily over the water. The girl's head snapped toward the sound. She stiffened, ready to flee, and Elias instinctively stepped sideways to block the bridge the old man might cross. Not trapping her, just giving her a moment. "It's just a neighbor," Elias murmured. "He won't come unless I say." The girl hesitated, staring at Jedediah's distant shape, small, steady, harmless looking from afar, though she couldn't have known that. After a long breath, she gave the smallest nod and looked back at Elias. "Name," she asked abruptly, as if needing one piece of certainty before she could make any choice at all. "Elias Mercer." She studied him, as though weighing the name itself. Then, quietly, Ahalina. The wind shifted. A raven cawed somewhere above the ridge. Elias felt the moment settle between them like a fragile truce. Footsteps approached from the side path, quick, light. Caleb Boone appeared, breathless, carrying a small coil of fence wire. His brown hair stuck out in uneven tufts, and his boots were muddy up to the ankles. "Mr. Mercer," Uncle Jed said. He stopped short when he saw her. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with the raw, instinctive softness children have when seeing someone who's hurting. "Hi," he said carefully, offering a small wave. Ahalina didn't return it, but she didn't retreat either. Her stare softened by a fraction. Caleb turned to Elias, voice low. "She's scared," he whispered, "like Pa used to be, after, you know." Elias felt something twist in his chest. Not pity, recognition. He faced Ahalina again. "You can stay in the barn tonight," he said. "We'll talk more when you've eaten something." Her gaze lingered on him as if searching for the trap hidden in his words. When she found none, her shoulders dropped a fraction, the first sign of surrender to exhaustion. "I stay," she said. "Tonight only. For now." Elias replied gently. He gestured toward the barn, but didn't touch her or move too close. She walked ahead of him, steps slow, careful, as she passed. He caught the faint scent of smoke in her hair, the kind that clings to someone who has slept beside dying embers for too many nights. Inside the dim barn, she paused at the threshold, taking in the hay piles, the soft snort of the mare in the corner stall, the patch of sunlight spilling through broken boards. Elias waited behind her, quietly, giving her the choice. She stepped in. Outside, wolves began to cry across the valley, their voices long and mournful. Ahalina stiffened, but this time she did not run. She simply sank onto the hay, drawing the blanket tighter around her. Elias watched from the doorway, feeling for the first time in a very long while that something inside his quiet little world had shifted. Morning came quietly, slipping into the barn through the thin slats as a pale ribbon of light. Elias found Ahalina awake, sitting cross-legged on the hay, her blanket drawn tightly around her shoulders. She had slept little, he could see that, but there was a steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there the night before. She rose as soon as he entered, as if bracing for an order. "You don't work today," he said. "You rest first." Her brow creased, not in gratitude, but in resistance. "I work," she insisted. "I said I would." She stepped past him before he could argue, walking barefoot across the frost-kissed ground as though pain was a language she no longer listened to. The morning air wrapped around her, cold enough to bite, but she didn't flinch. Elias followed at a distance, uneasy not about her presence, but about how much she was holding inside herself. People who carried that kind of silence rarely broke safely. She found the woodpile without being shown and set about gathering pieces of fallen pine. Her movement slow but methodical. Elias approached with caution. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. Ahalina kept working, her breath visible in the morning chill. "In my people," she murmured, "if you take food, you give labor. I took food." He watched her for a moment, pride woven into pain, duty woven into survival. She didn't know how to exist any other way. "All right," he said quietly, "but take the gloves." She stared at the gloves in his hand as though they were a trick. Only after a long pause did she reach for them, slipping them on with slow, unsure movements like someone unused to being offered anything that made their life easier. Throughout the morning, She moved around the ranch with silent focus. She fetched water, stacked the wood, swept the porch, checked the fence rails. If she didn't know how something worked, she watched Elias first, studied each gesture, then imitated it with startling accuracy. More than once he caught himself stopping mid-task, watching her instead. The precision of her hands, the way she scanned the horizon before crossing the yard, the way her eyes softened imperceptibly when the mare nudged her arm. Around noon, Caleb arrived, trotting across the bridge with a sack of nails over his shoulder. "She's still here," he whispered to Elias, wide-eyed. "Seems that way." Caleb approached her with a cautious smile. "Uncle Jed says I should help with the fence today. You want to, join?" Ahelina considered him as though weighing the intention behind the offer. Caleb's smile faltered, but she finally nodded. "I help." The boy brightened instantly. "Good. You're faster at tying rope knots than Mr. Mercer. Don't tell him I said that." She stared at him, dead serious, before turning to Elias. "Is true?" Elias huffed a quiet laugh. "Don't encourage him." A small shift happened then, not a smile, but the faintest easing of her guarded expression. Caleb's presence had a way of pulling warmth into empty spaces. In the afternoon, Jedediah Boone arrived, leaning on his walking stick. His lined face softened when he saw her working beside Caleb. "So," he murmured to Elias, "she's settling in." "I'm not sure she's staying," Elias said. Jedediah's eyes followed her for a long moment. "You don't drag a girl that lost into safety. You leave the door open until she decides to walk through." Elias didn't answer, but Jedediah's words settled in him like a truth he had always known. Later, as Ahelina carried buckets from the creek, Elias noticed her steps faltering. She tried to hide it, shifting the weight between her hands, but exhaustion betrayed her. He approached, offering to take the load. She stiffened instantly. "I can." "I know," he said gently, "but you don't have to." Her breath caught, not at the offer, at the unfamiliar softness in his tone, as if no one had said those words to her in a long time. She let him take one bucket, not both, just one. The compromise felt monumental. At dusk, she sat by the fire outside the barn, warming her hands. Elias settled opposite her, watching the flames dance on the rough stones between them. Silence stretched comfortable this time. She spoke first. "My people." She hesitated, searching for the right English phrasing. "We show feeling with gifts, with stones, or feathers, or..." She touched the blanket around her shoulders. "Things we make, not with touching." "Most white folks use words," Elias said quietly, "or gestures, sometimes too many." She studied his face in the firelight, eyes reflecting the flames. Then, almost shyly, "People like you kiss each other to show feeling." The question struck him unprepared, not improper, just achingly honest. He felt the words catch in his throat before he managed. "Sometimes, yes, but only if both people want it. It isn't something you take." Ahelina lowered her gaze, digesting this. A long moment passed before she whispered, "Strange custom." "Maybe," he said, "but not a bad one." She sat quietly after that, her fingers curling slightly against the blanket. For the first time, the fear in her eyes eased into something softer, curiosity, perhaps, or trust, cautiously making room for itself. When night settled fully over Silver Basin, Elias walked her back to the barn door. She paused at the threshold. "You kept your promise," she said. "Safe place, food, work. "And you kept yours," he replied. "You worked harder than anyone I've known." Her eyes lifted to his, and in that small, steady look was the first unspoken thread of something growing between them, slow, fragile, but unmistakably real. "Tomorrow," she said quietly. "I work more." Elias nodded. "Tomorrow." As she slipped into the barn, a soft calm settled over the ranch. He stood there for a long while, listening to the creek, feeling something shift inside him, a space opening where silence had lived for years. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them dared to name. Ahelina rose before sunrise, moving across the ranch with quiet purpose, feeding the mare, checking the fence line, gathering herbs she recognized near the creek. Elias worked alongside her, saying little, watching how she scanned the tree line every few minutes as if expecting danger to step out of the shadows. Sometimes he caught her humming under her breath, soft, broken notes of a song too old for this land, too fragile to survive the winter she had crossed. She was healing, though she didn't seem to know it. Late one afternoon, the sky turned the color of cooling iron, heavy with an unseasonal storm. Elias was inside sharpening an axe when he heard hoofbeats pounding down the trail, not the steady rhythm of Jedediah's old mare, faster, sharper, angry. Elias stepped outside just as a man on horseback swung into the yard, mud flying from his boots as he dismounted. He was broad-shouldered, with a tangled beard and a hard set to his jaw. Elias recognized him instantly, Roy Mathers, a trapper known more for trouble than pelts. Roy's gaze swept the yard, sharp as a knife, until it landed on the figure kneeling by the woodpile. Ahelina froze, her fingers tightening around the split log in her hands. Roy spat at the ground. "Well, hell," he drawled, "ain't this something?" Elias stepped between them without thinking. "You're on my land. Roy, state your business." Roy's grin widened, revealing teeth stained with tobacco. "My business is standing right behind you. Apache girl. By the look of her, thought I'd seen the last of them around here." His eyes flicked over her blanket, the soot marks on her skin. "Figured maybe you were keeping a little trophy." Ahelina rose slowly, her breath catching. Her hand drifted toward the small flint knife tucked beneath the blanket, not a threat, just instinct. Elias's voice dropped to something colder. "You've said enough." Roy ignored him. "Where'd you pick her up? Find her wandering, or was she part of that bunch down south that got scattered?" His gaze sharpened. "Heard some women slip through. Looks like I found one." Ahelina's body swayed, just slightly, as if the words had struck her across the face. The air thinned around her. Elias stepped forward. "She works here. That's all you need to know." Roy's smile vanished. His hand shot out fast, grabbing at the edge of her blanket, before he could tear it away. A voice thundered from the creek bridge. "That's enough." Jedediah Boone strode toward them, leaning heavily on his stick, Caleb trailing behind him. The old man's eyes didn't carry rage, only a steady, withering calm that could bring a charging bull to stillness. Roy dropped his hand but didn't back away, just checking what kind of company Mercer keeps. Hard to tell what's dangerous these days. Jedediah stepped beside Elias. "That girl hasn't harmed a soul, but you're 2 breaths from doing something you'll regret." His tone didn't rise, yet even the wind seemed to pause. Roy's jaw worked, for a moment. Elias thought the man might swing at him, or worse, at her. But Jedediah Boone's stare held, unwavering. Finally, Roy spat again, turned on his heel, and mounted his horse. "This ain't the end of it," he muttered. But his voice lacked conviction. Ahelina didn't move until the hoofbeats faded into the trees. Then her legs buckled. She caught herself on the woodpile, breath shaking, eyes wide with the memory of something Elias couldn't see but could feel in the air around her, heavy and suffocating. Elias reached out, but she flinched violently, taking a step back as though he'd raised a weapon. "I'm not him," he said quietly. She stared at him a long moment, chest rising and falling too fast. Then she turned and walked quickly toward the barn, disappearing inside. Jedediah placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "Give her time," he murmured. Sometimes fear leaves slower than the danger. Night came early, bringing a bitter cold that didn't belong to spring. Elias kept checking the barn, but each time he approached, he heard her soft breathing and forced himself to walk away. She needed space. He understood that now, but the valley wasn't done testing them. Near midnight, a sound split the silence, not human, but desperate, a shrill, panicked bellow from the far pasture. Elias shot upright. The cattle. He grabbed his coat and ran into the night, boots sinking into half-thawed mud. The moon was thin, offering little light, but he smelled the danger before he saw it, the musky, wild scent of a predator. Ahalina burst from the barn at the same moment, clutching her wooden spear. She didn't ask what was happening, she already knew. She sprinted toward the pasture, feet silent on the earth. "Stay behind me," Elias shouted. She didn't slow. They reached the clearing as a shadow streaked between the cows, a large gray wolf, ribs sharp beneath matted fur, driven by hunger, fierce enough to risk men and fire. The wolf lunged at the nearest calf. Ahalina moved first. With a cry that split the night, she leapt, driving the spear forward. The wolf twisted, the blow grazing its side but drawing blood. It wheeled back toward her, teeth bared. Elias charged, swinging the blunt end of his axe handle. It struck the wolf's hind leg, sending the animal stumbling. But the wolf recovered faster than either expected. It lunged again, this time at Elias, before it could reach him. Ahalina threw herself between them, arms raised. Elias grabbed her shoulder, yanking her aside as the wolf collided with his chest, knocking him backward. Pain exploded across his ribs as he hit the ground. Ahalina's scream cut through the night. She darted forward, seized the axe where it had fallen, and with a fierce, desperate strength Elias had never seen in her, drove it downward. The blow was enough to send the wolf scrambling away. It staggered, bleeding, then fled into the darkness, leaving only the chaos of panting animals and trampled snow. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Ahalina dropped to her knees beside Elias. "You hurt." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with something rawer, something she had never let herself reveal. "I'm fine," he managed, breath ragged. "You—" She didn't answer. Instead, she brushed a shaking hand against his arm, as though needing to feel he was real. When their eyes met, the air between them changed quiet, electric, unbearably honest. "You saved me," he whispered. "No." Her voice cracked. "You saved me first." That was the moment the last of her walls broke, not with sobs, not with confession, but with the way she stayed there beside him long after the danger had passed, refusing to look away. Ahalina, the girl who had run from everything, was no longer running. Elias lifted his hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull back and touch the side of her face. This time, she didn't flinch, not even a little. The wolf was gone, but the night held on to its echoes. The cattle shifted nervously in the dark, their breath steaming in the cold air. Elias pushed himself upright with a wince, pressing a hand to his bruised ribs. Ahalina steadied him without thinking, her fingers curled lightly around his arm, warm despite the lingering frost. She held on a moment too long before she realized it, then released him as if the contact burned. "Come inside," Elias murmured, voice low and hoarse. "You're shaking." She wasn't, or she didn't appear to be. But when she opened her mouth to argue, the sounds of the night seemed to collapse around her. Her face tightened, breath shortening, eyes drifting to somewhere far away, somewhere Elias couldn't see. "Ahelina," he said softly. She blinked, once, twice, as if waking from a place colder than Silver Basin. Inside the barn, the lantern light was warm, casting a golden circle across the hay. Ahelina sat on a low wooden stool, while Elias cleaned the shallow cut on her palm, a wound she hadn't even noticed. She watched him work, her expression caught between tension and disbelief, as though she had no memory of being tended to gently. "You shouldn't have put yourself between me and a wolf," Elias said, after a long stretch of silence. "You shouldn't have fallen," she replied. "I didn't fall. You did," he scoffed despite the pain. "You push a man that hard, anyone would fall." Ahelina's lips twitched, not a smile, but close. He wrapped a strip of cloth around her hand. She looked at the bandage as if it were something precious, fragile. "My people," she murmured, "do not touch without meaning." "I know," Elias said quietly. "So do I." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication neither dared to name. Outside, the storm clouds had thinned, moonlight slipping through cracks in the sky. Ahelina stood suddenly, pacing the small barn stall before stopping with her back to him. "I ran for many nights," she said. "From men with guns, from snow, from hunger." Her hands curled into fists. "From the place where my mother fell, where my father bled. I do not remember how long." Elias didn't interrupt. He didn't move. "They scattered us," she continued, voice cracking at the edges. "Family, tribe, all went different ways. When the storm came, I lost their tracks, lost everything." She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I thought if I stopped, the fear would find me." "And now," Elias asked gently. She turned. Her eyes glistened. Not with tears, Ahelina held her emotions like she held a blade tightly, refusing to show weakness, but with a quiet exhaustion that felt deeper than grief. "Now I don't know what to do when something feels safe." Elias rose carefully, ribs protesting. He approached her slowly, letting the moment breathe. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Not work, not stories, not trust. But you keep giving," she whispered. "Food, fire, kindness. You don't ask me why I fear certain sounds, why I check the trees, why I wake at night. Because I know what it is to carry something heavy," he replied. "You don't force someone to put down a burden they're not ready to let go." Her breath caught. Something in her expression loosened, softened, as though a final knot inside her chest had begun to unravel. "And the wolf," she asked after a moment. "You stood between us." Why Elias hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because it mattered too much. "Because I wanted you safe," he said simply. Ahelina stepped closer, so close he could see the faint speck of ash along her jawline. "And if," she swallowed, "if someone wants another safe, in your people, that means feeling," he nodded, "usually." She studied his face as though memorizing it, every line, every shadow, every intention. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Then tell me, if white men kiss to show that How does it begin? His heart stumbled. He lifted a hand slow, deliberate, giving her all the space in the world to turn away. She didn't. She leaned in, just slightly, her breath warm on his cheek. It begins, he said quietly, when both people choose it. I choose, she said. Their lips met gently, a soft, trembling touch that carried none of the violence of the world she had fled. It was slow, reverent, a beginning made not from hunger or desperation, but from two souls, broken in different ways, finally finding a place to rest. When they parted, she didn't step back. Not this time. Elias rested his forehead lightly against hers. You're safe here, Ahalina. She closed her eyes. For the first time, I believe you. Outside, Coldwater Creek whispered its steady song through the valley, as though the land itself exhaled in relief. Morning rose softly over Silver Basin, spreading pale gold across the frost-tipped grass. Coldwater Creek shimmered like a narrow ribbon of light, moving steadily past the two ranches as though carrying the night's fears away with it. A thin breeze rustled the budding branches along the bank, whispering the promise of early summer. Ahalina stepped out into the cool dawn with a basket in hand, her blanket replaced by one of Elias's old wool coats. It hung loose on her frame, sleeves rolled back awkwardly, but she wore it with quiet ease. She crossed the yard to the small garden patch beside the porch. The soil was soft beneath her fingers as she brushed aside the leaves, checking the sprouts she and Elias had planted only a few days earlier. New shoots had broken the surface, fragile, trembling, reaching for the sun. She smiled, not fully, not freely, but enough to soften the hard lines sorrow had carved into her face. Elias watched from the doorway, leaning a shoulder against the frame. The bruise along his ribs still ached, but the sight of her kneeling in the morning light eased something inside him more deeply than rest ever could. He didn't announce his presence. She sensed him anyway, the way one senses warmth in a cold room. She stood and turned toward him. You hurt? She asked. Not as much as yesterday. She nodded. Neither spoke further. They didn't need to. There was a gentleness between them now, quiet, steady, earned through fear and fire. Just then, a familiar voice rang across the creek. Elias, Ahalina, you awake over there? Caleb's shout was bright as birdsong. The boy came bounding over the bridge with a bundle of kindling strapped to his back. Jedediah followed more slowly, leaning on his stick, breath forming faint clouds in the cool air. The old man stopped at the edge of the yard, taking in the sight of Ahalina standing beside Elias. Well now, he said, eyes twinkling with something like pride. Looks like the valley's a touch warmer today. Caleb grinned at them both. Uncle Jed says the creek's running higher than usual. Means good luck. Ahalina glanced toward the water. The creek flowed strong, clear, unbroken. When she walked closer, she saw her reflection joined with Elias's behind her, faint but visible in the moving ripples. Jedediah stepped near, lowering his voice so only Elias could hear. You hold on to this one, son. Some people walk into your life like shadows, some like storms. But that girl, he nodded toward Ahalina, she walks like someone who wants to stay. Elias didn't answer. His gaze remained on her, watching the way she crouched by the water, trailing her fingers through the cold current as though greeting an old friend, after Caleb carried the kindling inside. Ahalina returned to Elias's side. She stood close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You said yesterday, she murmured, That safety is a choice. It is. She hesitated. Then if safety is a place, is this place? Elias looked out over the valley, the barn patched with mismatched boards, the crooked fence, the garden barely clinging to life, the creek that had always run steady but never felt like more than a boundary. Until now. It could be, he said. Ahelina's breath shivered. Not with fear, something gentler. And if heart chooses a place, not a path, Elias turned fully toward her. The morning light caught the edges of her hair, setting it aglow like the embers of last night's fire. He lifted a hand slow, as always, and let his fingers brush her cheek. She didn't shy away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, grounding herself in it. You can stay as long as you want. Ahelina, he said. A day, a season, a lifetime. It's your choice. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with certainty. Then I stay, she whispered, here, with you. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine needles across the ranch. The creek shimmered as a splash of sunlight danced along its surface, as if the valley itself recognized the moment. From that day forward, folks in the nearby town would say something had changed at the Mercer Ranch. They'd claim the echo in the valley sounded softer, the air warmer, the creek brighter. Some swore that when dawn touched the water just right, they could see two shapes reflected there standing side by side, unmoving, unafraid, and over time. Coldwater Creek gained a new name among the settlers who passed through. They called it Promise Water for the girl who found refuge on its banks, and the man who chose to share his quiet world with her until both their hearts learned how to breathe again.